Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, SAP RAR 1.1 in Action. I appreciate all of you who have joined and those who have been hanging on there and joined early. As the leaders in revenue recognition, we are pleased to present to you this ongoing series and hope that you will join us for our next one on February 25th. My name is John Froelich, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's event. Chris, next slide, please. Just some quick housekeeping things for all of you who are on here. If you have a question, we have a GoToWebinar Q&A box, and you can put in a question. We also have a chat down there, so for those of you who want to engage and ask some real-time questions, please feel free to do that. We will also have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of this session. So we look forward to any questions and helping you learn about SAP RAR. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to get a copy of this webinar. In addition, there are handout materials available to you in the handouts box. So if you were to look down at your little dashboard, if you will, there is a handouts thing. You can open that up and click there and download the content. Feedback, there will be a survey available at the end of this webinar. We hope you'll provide us with feedback. We also welcome you to send feedback either to us via our Twitter handle at Bramasol, or you can come to our website and at www.bramasol.com. Contact us, leave us a note, and we will be happy to respond. Next slide, please, Chris. I'd like to welcome today's speakers. We have Chris Ritterhern here. Chris was at our last webinar, as well as Hans, who will be speaking. You can see that Chris has extensive experience in both SAP and technical experience, but most importantly, folks, Chris is the #1 presenter, or one of the top presenters for SAP RAR in the country today. So you're going to see something from the guy who has done it in a lot of different places, and I hope you get a lot out of that. Hans Christian Metz is our senior lead consultant and architect. In addition to having over 15 years of experience managing complex integration of accounting, he also is an accounting expert. And Hans has worked on numerous RAR projects. In fact, Hans has is distinguished by the fact that he has been the one person or on one project that has gone live on the SAP RAR 1.0 solution. So you have the combination of expertise and experience here. Chris, next slide, please. At Bramasol, we believe in helping companies get the most from their SAP business solutions. We have the experience and expertise to help guide you on making the most of your SAP RevRec solution. As you can see from this slide, we have over 20 years of SAP experience, and as the leaders in revenue recognition, we have helped companies from the Fortune 50 to SME get RevRec ready. Over 75% of the SAP 1.1 ramp-ups were either coached by or had significant contributions from our team. We have a partnership with the SAP Development Organization and participated in testing of the 1.1 product. We have numerous POC, workshop, and consulting projects in place today. And our certified SAP consultants are working throughout the United States to help companies just like yours help them get RevRec ready. You know, as a friend of mine recently said to me, think of us as your RevRec Sherpa. We're here not only to help you plan, but to guide you up the mountain and to help you find the best opportunity for RAR to help you be successful. I'm going to be brief because there is a lot to see in the demo, and I know that you have all signed up to see that, not to hear me talk. So with that, Chris, I am going to hand it over to you. And I'll be back at the end of this to take questions and help wrap things up. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those on the East Coast time zone. Today we're going to be going over the revenue recognition software in SAP. We'll actually be in the software and doing a couple of scenarios. Before we get into the live software, we just wanted to bring you up to speed about the functionality of the software and some of the aspects to it that we feel are key so that you get the most out of this presentation today. So today you're going to see how RAR operates, which is our acronym for Revenue Accounting and Reporting. You'll get a sense of before and after business processes, and you'll get a good sense of, after this presentation, some benefits to your company of the new regulation. Now, we say benefits, it's also a nice way of saying that because it's a regulatory compliance issue, you have to do this. So we like to call it benefits, but keep in mind that the new accounting standards are mandatory, especially for publicly reporting companies too. Speaking about benefits, something that we've seen in implementing a lot of customers, I think Hans has some insight into that. Hans, what are your thoughts about some of the benefits you've seen out there and some of the processes?
Yes, so that's actually kind of, we have seen foremost, we have seen the development in the market. A while back when we spoke to customers, we saw kind of like more of attempts to go ahead or to go around or not embracing the RAR solution or really any solution. Customers thought they could get away without adapting to the new guidelines that much. Now when we're speaking with customers, what we can see that obviously there's a growing awareness of the requirements, probably driven also by the fact that we're getting closer to the first deadlines. So even if the old numbers still work, stating how you want to tackle the change, that actually starts to have to be disclosed. We're also talking more with customers about the SAP solution, its footprint and so on, and our services to implement. And we are also going more into situations where we have either a QC that is driven very quickly, or we go directly into implementations. Now, as for the advantage of the solution, if you're an SAP, what you don't want to have to do, obviously, is to integrate with third-party tools, have a separate server, interfaces, and so on that you have to deal with. And that's obviously the big advantage of the solution that becomes ever clearer to the customers. It's 100% SAP. It's integrated. It's SAP solution for your compliance in that area, right? There's no separate license fee. And obviously, if you already, since you're on SAP, you already have the support infrastructure in place to deal with it. So that is a big plus, right? So I think in short, the advantage of the solution is really that it's SAP standard solution for regulatory compliance, and we will see in this webinar in detail how its real advantage is to provide better visibility on your revenue streams.
Thank you, Hans. So today we're going to be demonstrating two scenarios. The first scenario is a bundled hardware solution that has a service and subscription associated with it. It's a generic media device, and you'll get a sense of what the software operates and does from that perspective. The second scenario we'll do with intellectual property. In this case, it's a movie title or a title for TV. And you get a sense of how much revenue accounting software will do for you in generating the things that need to be tracked from a regulatory standpoint. And these are going to be shown live, by the way, out of our demo systems, which is based in the cloud. But a key message to keep in mind as we go through this is we'd like you to see the impact of RAR in action and how it helps your business. What's important there is we see that getting started now is very important because of the impact to overall the organization. And just keep in mind that this is something we're doing every day, and we have the experience to really help you get past what it is from the regulations and also the impact to your organization. So what is revenue recognition? Revenue is recognized when a customer obtains control of a goods or service. And for those that were on my first webinar, there is a repeat of a few slides here. We kept it just a few. But we wanted to be fair to those who are joining and hadn't been in the prior webinar, just to bring them up to speed. So as we go through the terminology, they have at least a baseline of it. So just a few slides, and I appreciate the patience for those that were in the prior webinar. Specifically, when a customer obtains control and they have the ability to direct the use of or obtain benefit from the goods or service. So this is the official definition of deferred revenue, and as you might run across it out there in your goods or services that you are providing. The new regulations is encapsulated in about 5 major steps. And looking at each one of these steps, we're not going to discuss these in detail, but we just wanted to give you a sense of what it's like. by the way, today's presentation is in the handout area of the GoToWebinar control panel, and if you'd like to, you're welcome to download that so that you're not waiting for a copy of this presentation. It's there for you now. But looking at the revenue accounting and reporting standards and how it affects all revenue contracts, and seeing how these 5 steps are deployed, Hans, what is your experience in seeing the deployment of this 5-step model out there?
Well, so the 5-step model, what it really is, it's a framework, right? So it doesn't tell you exactly what to do in all details. That is something that you have to work out, right? Both kind of like on the basis of what it really means for you, as well as how you then technically put it into a calculation and have a system to do that calculation for you. And those 5 steps obviously have a different meaning to different sectors and different customers. Right? Each one of them could be trivial for you, but it's very likely that at least some of them pose some difficulty and some problems, and those will have to be sorted out, will have to be worked on, will have to be cleared up during the implementation. So, for instance, identifying the customer, the contract, that is, you would think pretty trivial, but what could happen to you is that you only have sales orders in the system that are part of an overall contract that you may not have in the system. Then it already becomes a little bit trickier. The POB, so you will hear that abbreviation very often, right? That is the performance obligation. So that is what you have to do for the customer, what you have to do to be allowed to recognize revenue. To identify those separately, that can also be tricky because your sales order does not necessarily show all of those. So you might have some implied positions in there, you might have warranties, you might have specific services that you provide that you don't charge for, that you don't list on the sales order, but that are understood to be your duty to provide in order to recognize some of the revenue. So that could be another problem. Determine the transaction price, one would think is pretty straightforward, but maybe not so. Maybe you have something, again, for instance, you might have items that you don't sell that are not listed with a specific price. The transaction price is really what the customer will ultimately pay. You will also hear in the presentation and in the system, you will hear the word transaction price also is called by the system also the contractual price. So that's what the customer can see what they're officially paying, even if that may not match up with what you're doing internally. Then the allocation of the transaction price, we're going to see that very, very clearly, very graphically, very interestingly directly in the system later on. So that is basically the shares of revenue per performance obligation, and that share is determined by the share of the standalone sales price. So a comparison, kind of like a comparison to a sometimes fictitious price, how you would sell that good by itself. And that is basically driving what you can recognize. And lastly, then obviously the fulfillment. We're treating that pretty simply here in the system and demos. That might become also more involved for you. So the idea, generally speaking, with these 5 steps is it is a mandatory framework, and that is used across all sectors, across companies, right, to arrive at comparable recognition of revenues for what should be or what are comparable business transactions.
Thanks, Hans. So you hear the term or the acronym POB, and just to give a brief definition of it, it's a performance obligation as defined in the new regulations. And somebody might be wondering about the history of this. Prior to the inception of this performance obligation, for companies that had deferred revenue scenarios, there were actually multiple ways that could be recognized that varied by industry and even product category. So there was no real common way to see the true story of somebody's deferred revenue because there were so many definitions out there. So the new regulations have cleaned that up so that it's one size fits all. And we're generally finding that works, but as you know, these regulations are coming out. They've just been published, so we'll see how that goes. But if, according to what we're seeing, it does work, and there are quite a few operations that you can take into, and you may have to actually change some of your business processes, and we'll talk about that as we go. Okay. So onward. So our scenario today, we're going to be going into the software. Let's set up the scenario so you can see how it's going to operate. Okay, we have a media device here that we're going to be selling. When you buy this device for $199, it includes the first 6 months of your subscription. If you were to buy the media box itself, which delivers video on its own, it's $200. Or if you were to say, I just want to pay for a subscription on its own, it's $20. So keep those in mind in just a minute. So the breakdown of our deal is that we said, well, internally we've decided this is the way we're going to do it, and that's how we came up with $199, and we're saying that we're discounting the monthly service. Perhaps we've even published that. So we're saying that's $15 in reality what we're going to be charging, although they just pay $199. So what that means is the standalone selling price for the media device when purchased on its own is $200. The standalone cost for the subscription is $20 a month. Those two numbers establish a ratio. So just keep that in mind of that ratio. We'll talk about that more as we go. Then we apply our bundle pricing. So that ratio then drives how we're actually going to internally allocate and recognize the revenue because of our previously published standalone selling price. As we get into this demo, by the way, we'll be using SAP's RAR version 1.1 in our AWS demo and cloud and POC cloud environment. So a couple more ideas for you to look at, and then we'll step into the software. Since it lives with Enterprise Core Component, it looks something like this. We have our swim lane diagram here, and in the middle there you've got SAP ECC. That'll be our operational transaction system. Although for revenue accounting, it doesn't have to be ECC. You can actually come in from external systems to the new revenue accounting engine. So we're going to do a contract created in ECC. We're actually going to do an explicit transfer to the RAR module, which is included with it. And then from there, we'll see the behavior of the revenue accounting contract as it moves through. And then generally, anything that happens up in the operational layer, and I'm looking at the events, it says contract entered, or contract changed, an item fulfilled, or an event completed, or there's a return. These are all operational aspects that then will get automatically transmitted down and will affect the appropriate revenue contract. Our system that we're demoing from looks like this. It's in the Amazon cloud. It's an SAP ECC system. This is our version, and then RAR is loaded on that. So one thing that's nice about RAR is it doesn't require a separate server or anything. It's just for those who have SAP, you just load it on separately. For those that don't have SAP, we'll talk about options for you in terms of running SAP's RAR as a standalone engine for your environment. Okay, let's take a look. So here I am, and I'm now logged into my SAP system. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a contract. So I'll expand this out just a little bit so you can see better. There we go. Okay, so here I am. I'm actually using this as the back end to create the contract. So don't be too concerned about what we're doing here. I just want to give you a sense of what happens when the system is in place. Okay, so we're going to say this contract starts from this year. And let's say that it's going to run to the end of the year. There we go. And we have our service or our device. There's one of those. And then that's going to include, and I'm calling this out separately just so that you can see it, the actual service. So, and the reason I call that out separately, let's say that we offer a promotion so that the customer then can come back later and extend their contract. So we're taking advantage of the billing functionality within SAP to auto-generate that. So now we have a year's worth of contract automatically included. We're going to change that to 1 month's worth. So we said that was included as part of this deal here. And let's make sure I just end the month correctly. Okay, there we go. So there we go. So this is including our 6 months of service here, and then we'll say that the first month can be recognized because we're already into January. So everything is set up at this point here. So we'll go back to our contract, and we'll save it. Okay, so sales order number 517 has been created. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move that into the revenue accounting module. So normally this is an automatic function. We are doing it so that you can see the impact of the mirror contract that's created. So if we look here, I'll say, here's all the items to be transferred over to the revenue accounting module, which is sitting on the same server as my ERP system. And if you notice, it says there's 7 items that are processed here. And the reason it says 7 is because it's 1 for the device itself and 1 POB for each of the billing lines that we generated out of the system here. So let's go look at the revenue contract that was created. So now I'm going into my SAP Revenue Accounting System directly. And you see it's just a transaction, a menu path that I pick up. And let's take a look at that contract that we just created. And if I look here, I'll see that there were two contracts that were created. The reason there's two is because one is following the IFRS regulations and the other one is following US GAAP. So the SAP application for revenue accounting automatically complies with either regulations as they're being published and set up there. So I don't have to be concerned about that. Let's look at the US GAAP version of this. So when I look at this revenue contract that's been created, it's got two items to it. So let's look at the very top here. I'm going to click on this button. This is revenue schedule. And this is where it gets more interesting. Now I can see, okay, here is the revenue schedule for this particular line item. I see there's recognized revenue of $12.44. So why is that? That's because in my contract I said that can now be invoiced. It's not necessarily invoiced, but it can be. And if you look at the status button here that I'm hovering over, the gray diamond, it says it's recognized but not posted. It's because we didn't send an invoice out for it. And we'll change that after a bit here. You can also see at the very bottom down here, there's a line item that says unscheduled for accounting. And what that means is that's the actual box. So the customer hasn't activated it or we haven't indicated it as delivered out to the customer. So let's take that a little bit further now and let's go ahead and indicate the unit as delivered or activated or however we want to refer to it. Again, this could potentially be an automatic step. It doesn't have to be explicit like I'm doing here, but we just want to give you a sense of what it's like as you move through the system here. We'll post this goods issue. So now the device is actually activated. So what's that mean here? So let's update our revenue accounting contract. And I'm going to try and keep slow here because I understand the screens don't paint quite as quickly as I move along here. So there's one item to update here. We'll process that through. Okay, so that's been processed through. Let's go back into the revenue accounting system. So now, if you look at the top here, it says recognized revenue, $12.44. Well, but we just delivered this device here at the bottom that has a internal allocation price of $124.34. So I'm going to hit refresh at the top up here. And now you can see that my recognized revenue is now $136.81. So if you take a monthly plus the device, that's my recognized revenue. So away I go. Now let's actually explicitly invoice for 1 month. So when we say invoice, are we issuing an invoice? No, because we've already collected the money. What we're doing is we're just doing our internal due diligence to say, okay, we're formally sending out the accounting document that says that that revenue is now ours. And so again, I'll update the revenue contract with that information. So we've done one transaction in the SAP system. In this case, we've said we've billed for the monthly subscription. And let's just come back here. And what you'll notice here is on this one line at the very top here, there's a column that says revenue, posted, and invoice. So you'll see a change here in invoice when I hit refresh. So now you saw there's a 15 that's popped in there because that was our deal of price. In other words, we said that when you got this deal, the formal number is actually $15, but the actually internally allocated number is $12.44. So you can see the differences here as we move forward. And what's also nice is that I can look under fulfilled progress and see, okay, I'm 68% or 67%, 69% along in this particular revenue contract, and maybe I'm doing some reporting and look at all these contracts in general to get a sense of what's happening out there. What's also nice is I can go and get more information about each one of these contracts here. So for example, let's say I want to get a sense of the contract overview. So I just want to get a quick look at what's happening with this particular contract out there. So there's automatically some built-in graphics reported with the software here. In this case, I've got my med device, my media device here, and I can look at performance obligation types. And at the very bottom of my screen, I can see here's my expected revenue going forward by the particular service or hardware that was delivered. And this is all standard part of the software. What's also nice, too, is that if for some reason I need to go back and say, well, gee, what's been going on with all contracts? I want to get a sense of, is everything okay? are there any issues out there, I can run reports from a reconciliation standpoint that give me a sense of what's happening out there. So let's just look at one particular period here. Let's just look at the US GAAP ones. And what the system's doing now is it's come back and it says, you've got two issues, and one has to do with, there's some issue with the revenue adjustment, and there's another one has to do with the unbilled receivables. So I've got two issues that I can hyperlink into and start to drive into what is the particular issue, why didn't these get moved through the particular system here. Let's take a look at another period here and say, well, we want to get another look and see if there's any more of these. And you can see in period 12, I've got a few more of these here where I'm going to come back and say, okay, here I got to look at this one here, or there's some stalled up, it hasn't been posted through the system here. Okay, so let's take a look at what we just saw here. So what I did is I brought in some screens and highlighted certain aspects so you can get a sense of what happens out there. So here was our transactional system sales contract, $199. Next, we use an auto-generated installment plan in SAP, so a monthly subscription was auto-generated, and each one of those became a performance obligation. So this was done automatically for us. We didn't do anything special for it. It was just done as part of the transaction level system. The contract dates can be set, so what's nice is when I do it this particular way using SAP is, let's say that we again offer a special to the customer, hey, you know what, you're almost at your last month. If you sign up for another 6 months, we'll give you a deal. All I have to do is come in here and change this one value. I might have it done automatically. It might be done through a website where the customer does it, and it will update this existing contract. I don't have to do anything special about that. All the items were moved over. 2 contracts were created according to both accounting principles. We looked at the recognized revenue of $1244. We activated a device. We saw that the money additionally came through. And then this last one we didn't do because we didn't run a formal posting run. But when you run a posting run, and then for those in the audience that are looking at this, again, there's a handout and you can actually backtrack these numbers. This is what's happening from the revenue accounting module automatically back up into the SAP financial system. So it's automatically updating the appropriate chart of accounts and the related controlling elements to that. So this is what actually happens as we go back. You can see there's a lot of adjustments. It's all done automatically per regulations. There's nothing that I had to do to set this up to get this to work. Okay, so let's go a little step further here and take a look at what we've seen here. So, and then we had we saw the graphic, the reconciliation report. Okay, so RAR in action. Let's talk about our next scenario here. And in this scenario, we've got something a little bit different in terms of its behavior. It's intellectual property, and in this case, our scenario looks like this. We have 3 movie titles that are going to be sold out there. And the 3 movie titles have these particular price, but it doesn't matter the particular term that you use, the price is the same. So whether I go 3 months or 7 months, I'm looking at the middle column in terms of months, or 24 months, it's that number divided out. And we decided by convention for this particular client that when we did a movie, because they had multiple terms, it would be better just to list it out in the contract individually. Or for example, I ran Where the Smiths, they had such a success to it that they wanted to schedule it for their next season and run it for another 3 months. So they called back, amended the contract, and said, hey, put us down, and you know, we're good with the price. So this is the scenario that we're talking about here. You might look to saying, hey, the list price and SSP are the same. Is that always the case? Hans, can you give us a little more illumination on why that is in this particular scenario?
Yeah, so the guidelines basically state only that the allocations are based on the relative standalone sales prices of a performance obligation inside an RA contract, inside a revenue accounting contract. Now, it doesn't say that the SSP always has to be different from the transactional price, from the contractual price, right? So it could be the same. That could happen for different reasons. So either it's just pure coincidence. So for instance, you're selling maybe for movies, well, the better example one might be something like if you sell the CDs of a movie. Usually you sell them for whatever, $10. And well, to this customer, you also sold them for $10. So then your standalone sales price and your contractual values would be $10, right? Or it could also be by virtue of the fact, and that's a little closer to the amount that we see here and the example that we have here, is that you simply do not have multiple transactions in different contracts for the exact same good at different prices. So for instance, the A-grade movie, that is a specific window that might be directly after the end of the theatrical run. So there is really only one situation, one time, one sale of this specific good. So in that case, well, your contract price is what you negotiated, what is the standalone sales price. So it is the same. So in this case, well, they are the same. So these are the two cases where it could be the same. And note that by default, there might still be an allocation happening, simply technically because of the different weights, so the different standalone sales price ratios, and also that because of their deferral over time. So you can still get an allocation, right? That's number one. And then maybe also another note is that if you don't like that, because I can imagine there's some of you out there that say, well, I don't want that. I mean, if my standalone sales price, if I'm really selling for what it usually is, then I don't want to have anything going on there. I just want to have that number run through, right? So that is not a problem. We actually have specifically for that, SP provides actually options for building around that and making that possible either by a value or by a percentage, so that only if you have a certain difference. So if you, for instance, if the standalone sales price would normally be 1 million, but now you sold it for 900,000, that's 10% difference, and you do want to have a calculation. But if it was instead of so 1 million standalone sales price, but maybe 999,000 was the sales price, right? That case, you don't want to have an allocation going on. So you can do that either way. So, but basically what we're doing with the example is that we're just showcasing one possible case where the standalone sales price matches the transaction price. So you don't confuse the two. They can be the same, but they can be different.
Thank you, Hans. Now, one other wrinkle that we're doing that's different in this one is as we go into the demo now, we are actually going to also show one of the things that Bramasol brings to the party when we do these implementations. In this case, the client wanted a clearer view to all the revenue picture and all like that and everything that's going on. And we said, well, let's take advantage of the dashboarding using the SAP Lumiere Cloud. So we basically have set up in this demo, our cloud is talking to their cloud, and the two clouds together are providing functionality. So we'll show you an example of Lumiere reaching directly into the system and giving us an interesting looking dashboard. And it's something that we give as a good way for users to visualize what's happening within their environment. So let's take a look. So here we are in our accounting in our transaction system again, and let's go over to a contract now. In this case, rather than me entering all the components to it, if you guys are familiar with the cooking show from Emerald, his cooking show there where he is madly working on a kitchen table with lots of ingredients, and then all of a sudden he reaches over to the oven and magically pulls out the finished product. We're a bit like that here. So I've pre-entered everything in there, and what we're going to do is add the last title so that you can see how it operates here. So I've got 5 lines that I'm putting into here, and we'll just complete this contract. The customer called up and said, I had a great time with this. We got good value out of it. And what we want to do now is we want to add another run for this one for our upcoming season out there. So we'll do that. And then we'll make an adjustment for the dates, saying, you know, here's the dates that we want to use. There we go. So we'll put the future dates in here that the customer is going to work with. So we're just adjusting the billing dates here. And there we go. Okay, and we can see the prices there, and that's all we did. So now we've got 5 line items here. Let's save this particular contract. So that's contract number 516. So that's been saved. Okay, now let's take that contract, and again, I'm explicitly moving this so you can just see the movement into the revenue accounting system. This would normally be automatic. It could be events-based, it could be time-based, you pick. Okay, so, wow, there's a lot of stuff that was generated here. Let's go ahead and select them all, and let's go ahead and process these these performance obligations that were generated. So 5 line items automatically generated 57 performance obligations. So this is the revenue accounting module working for me. Let's go take a closer look at the actual contract that was generated out there for me. So you can see that meeting the new regulations actually can generate a lot of administrative work if you were to try and do this manually. But given this particular piece of software that SAP supplied, they've tried to make it as clean as possible for you to be able to integrate with it. So let's look at this revenue contract. And at one level, it seems very straightforward. There's my 5 titles, and look at the revenue schedule. So very busy. I've got a lot of components here. All the performance obligations are there. In that sales contract, there were some old dates out there. So if we just jump back, just jump back to the SAP system for a second here, and let's take one quick look at the contract. I'll point out a couple of aspects of this particular contract that you may not have seen initially as I buzzed through it here. In this case here, notice the billing dates. One is in 2015. Here was not quite current yet. Here's one that goes back to 2014, and we went ahead and removed the billing block on all those dates because it was a backdated contract. So we did that in our contract, and I think we have one other one where we did that too. Here's one that was a contract line item, and we're restating it so that it meets the new regulations. So we took off the information here. So when I'm in my system here, that's where this recognized revenue comes from, and I actually can sort by status. So if I click on status here, I can see all the ones that are available to be recognized, and I can see that I've got 1.6 million worth of revenue that I'll actually be able to put my mitts on as opposed to sitting in the ever and ever bit bucket of deferred revenue. And I'm 50% along for this particular contract. So really nice to be able to see that functionality. Let's go back and let's focus on a couple of the aspects of this. Before I do that, the other question you might ask is, what's an easier way to see all this information? Well, I mentioned that we were using dashboarding. So here it is. This is the SAP Lumira. It is connected up in real time to that particular system here. And this is a dashboard that is actually reaching into the transaction system and giving me information out of that ERP system with the revenue accounting contracts. This is called a storyboard. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements to it. So somebody can quickly glean, I've got in this example, I've got 156 million in revenue, deferred revenue contracts out there. And my most current invoices in general is 7 million. So what's that tell me? I got a huge chunk of change out there that's waiting on different criteria depending on whatever that criteria happens to be. And if I look over here at my tag cloud, I can hover over each one of these, and I can see here is the transaction price and the invoice price, so I can start to look into some more details. Or let's say, you know what, let's launch this out. Now, what's nice about this also is I'm hovering on the top right of this square. I can export the data records. So for those of us that like to bring it into our tried and true friend Excel, you can do that. Or I can launch this and say, you know what, really what I want to do is I want to look at what the story was in a particular time period. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, show me a particular quarter, and let's see what the story was in the 4th quarter of this year. So not only am I looking at this information, but I can see the details behind it. So here's my tag cloud, and these are POB types. We actually gave them short names, so some are a little more technical. This has related to loan. Here's fees. Here's my media service, and I can see we've got $876 out there, going $60 ready to come in. So easy to see, lots of information out there in my tag cloud. So very nice. I can also do things like, let's say that, you know, here is the procedure or the new business process model that I'm taking advantage of that. And when I click on that link there, that picture, there was a hyperlink behind it. It actually fires off a website and will show me information further that I could do and look at regarding the documentation of how this operates out there. So each one of these can be opened up, and I can get further information about that. And that's showing reaching in from the SAP system, and then here is the website it launched. Oh yeah, look, hey, it's the Bramasol website, and the RAR webinar, which we are on now. So you can use it to launch into other areas and bring additional information or other storyboards if I choose to. So back to our presentation. Let's talk about what we've seen here. So briefly, let's go back one. We had the mirror contract out there. and we had 50+ lines generated out of that. We also noticed the fact that you saw a way of looking at what was allocated and the allocation effect. And Hans, can you just briefly touch on the concept of allocation in the new regulations, please?
Yes, so the allocation effect, right, that is what we, well, let's put it the other way around, right? So the columns reflect really the way the values have to be calculated under the new guidelines. The first column is the first column that has a value is the contractual price, also transaction price. That is what the customer pays to us. The allocated amount is the standalone sales price share applied to the overall contract value. So that is what we are allowed to recognize as revenue. And from that, the system then calculates, and you can see that, for instance, for the first item, we had 700,000 that we can recognize out of 1 million that has been billed, right? The second one is 780 and so on. So these are amounts we can recognize as revenue once we have those performance obligations fulfilled. Now the difference is the allocation effect. So what do we have to change? So what do we have to defer? What can we not recognize, or what can we actually more recognize? But you can point to see that the third POB, so 39002, the third line, actually we can recognize 1.57 million, right? Instead of, or despite of originally only having 900,000 as a contractual price. So that means we will have a higher allocation effect, a positive allocation effect. You will also hear those the allocation effect being referred to as carve-in or carve-out, depending if it's negative or if it's positive, right? So it is really basically the difference. The columns show the calculation, and it's really the difference between the revenue that can be recognized and what has been billed to the customer. That's of interest here.
Great, thanks, Hans. And then we saw the dashboard as we went through this, by the way, and this is an example of what Bramasol can bring to the party, the intellectual property that we help bring to it. So not only are we helping you meet the new regulations, but we're also introducing a paradigm where those that consume and look at the results have a better way of seeing that. So for scenario 2, we saw a revenue contract of 50+ POB lines automatically generated, an example of unit pricing that is billed monthly as opposed to changed, and then dashboarding as a result of that. So you might ask yourself, how do I get started? What do I need to do? We get to ask that question all day long, and we say one of the best things to do is to step in, take a test drive, get a sense of what it means to actually model one of your scenarios, even if you can't think of all the little gory details that are there, but this is why you would ask us to help out. So we come in a workshop type approach, which is 5 major activities to A, determine the overall impact of the company. So we look at the superset, all the business processes that are potentially affected. We have to do a quick comparison of those, or selected elements of those, to the new regulations. At the same time, what we're looking to do is get a good, fast start, informative, transferring knowledge to you about what it means to take a scenario and move it to this, and looking at the alternatives as pure design thinking. And more specifically, as we get through it, team members and key stakeholders are engaged. We do a business process review. We get the different departments involved. We establish a workshop cycle, so the new next activities are a cycle. So you go through it, discuss it. Okay, you know, we saw that there's 12 scenarios. Let's focus on 3 for our proof of concept. And let's look at those and get into the model. Let's try one and take a look. So you can iteratively go back and forth. That's what's really nice is SAP has developed this as an application as opposed to I've got to rewrite coding. And then after all that, now that I've got a sense of what's going on, I can then step back, take a breather, and say, okay, what's this mean now to do all of our scenarios and really start to talk about moving this into a productive environment. So these are the things that we are doing. And as we go through this cycle, by the way, understand that what we're doing is we're looking at your business process. We're looking at the standard RAR scenario, which is per the regulations. Can we use it as is? Nope. Simple change, maybe. Business process change, possible, which means we get into change management. So we apprise you of change management and what that means in terms of moving along from a change management perspective. So what we learned today? Well, one, I think you will see the RAR module is smoothly integrated into the transaction layer, and it can be an external system. And in fact, in our next webinar, we'll talk more about integrating an external and using revenue accounting as a standalone module. Stay tuned to our website. John will talk to you about that. We can use different types of business processes. And what's important is we would like you to know, we'd like you to realize it's important to engage with a partner who can think in the box and out of the box at the same time. Because it is a new regulation that's coming down, you do have to comply with it. There are a number of aspects you need to be aware of. Hans, can you elaborate a bit about scenarios and some of your experience out there just briefly, because I know we're running a little bit at time here.
Yeah, so we have seen a variety of scenarios. I think probably one good idea is to first take a step back a little bit. Chris, you have alluded to that, to talk a little bit about the different landscapes, the different architectural solutions. So the engine is really meant to work independently of a specific, if you will, feeder module. So we have demoed it here with SD, but it could work as well from being fed data from outside systems. Those can be SAP systems. So for instance, we at Bramasol, we're working actively on projects and on discussions around IPM, for instance, CRM-based intellectual property management. We're also talking about BRIM integration hybrids, so more complex billing that is also built on CRM. It could be file loads. We'll work extensively with those. So the new release actually offers an option for that. So that is basically the landscape, the architecture behind the scenes, if you will, or overall. And then obviously you have the individual business scenarios, and those could be varying from very complex, so like sales orders or contracts with dozens of line items, dozens or even more POBs, right, with complex calculations, all the way to rather simple calculations, similar actually to what we're doing here, even on a demo basis. So we have seen really a wide range for that. And that obviously will also be a reality. For you, there will be a limited range, but for us at Bramasol, we have to work with a whole range of scenarios here.
Thanks, Hans. So look at it from another perspective too. What are going to be the business benefits? Because we all like to say, hey, we're going to do something not because we're being forced to, but also because it brings a benefit to my company. Insights to the impact of deferred revenue reporting in the new paradigm, better transparency to the requirements that are there, and alignment. You can see that the new regulations now don't allow a lot of wiggle room. You do report it this way, so that therefore means everybody gets to see it that way. From a technical infrastructure perspective, they get to, again, have good insights into the practice, into the process, also a common platform because it's SAP. So it's one they know and have good expertise and strong ability with. And with SAP's new RAR capability, you've got good visibility into the revenue contract exposure. You saw a simple example of that in the standard, and then if we take it further into a dashboard type process, we can look at profitability based on the standalone selling price, new term introduced as part of the regulation. We can get a good sense of contract summary. We can get a good sense of auditing what's not right. So we can go back through and say what didn't move through the pipe or what I need to be aware of. And looking at contracts and also things like lease data or real estate type transactions too as a component of that. So again, I appreciate your patience. I know we're at time. I'm going to turn this back over to John. And for those that would like, you're welcome to ask questions. Again, a copy of this presentation is in the handout section of your go-to control panel. You can download it from there. John?
Yeah, thank you guys. That was terrific, and I thank you everybody for hanging in there. We'll try to keep this short. As you can see, folks, the SAP RAR solution offers a number of different benefits, including automation, scalability, and flexibility. So I encourage you to follow up and talk to us about it. We did have a couple of quick questions that were out there. One of them you guys answered early on, so that was about, how do I get started? But why should they get started now, Chris? Why are companies, not taking action?
And that's a good question, John. And it's a bit like, well, it's mañana, so I don't need to deal with it. Well, we know that, and our experience has shown this represents a potential change, or does represent a change to the business process, which brings into focus the concept of change management. This affects all departments, or most departments within your company. And because some of the processes upon which you recognize deferred revenue now will change significantly because of the new regulations, you need time to verbalize that, articulate it, and socialize it with your company so they understand what's going on. And really importantly is the finance team is going to be looked to as the leaders of this one because it is a financial component to this one. So the sooner they get up to speed, and we said knowledge is power, the smoother it makes it for everybody as we go forward. Then the finance team says, yep, we totally know it. We modeled up a couple of our key processes. We're familiar with that, and now we're talking about the next steps to really roll it in so we're in compliance, so that we're not one of the companies that are having to put footnotes on our financial statements because we're reporting under old regulations, and people always don't like to have footnotes when they're reading my annual report. John?
Yeah, a number of you have mentioned that there are some challenges with downloading the handouts. We will make those available through the website, and we will be sending out a thank you email that you can access those as well. There is a question here. Somebody asked, what's the difference between posted revenue and invoiced revenue?
Hans,
why don't you take that one?
Yes, so maybe first, so the term posted that we saw on the screens from the engine basically really means what the engine posts. Now, the engine itself does not post billing, right? And the billing comes from SD or from any other source where you drive your billing. So the posted revenue is effectively what the system corrects to recognized revenue, right? So you're seeing these lines, it has that line where it says not posted yet. That means that the engine has not corrected the billed revenue to the recognized revenue. I think that's probably the long and short of it.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Hey, Chris, somebody asked, and we talk about RAR being a module, but how does RAR interface with ECC? Do we need to have NetWeaver? Is it through BDocs? You know, how does that work?
Another good question here. SAP was very keen to make this as straightforward as possible for their tens of thousands of existing customers out there who are going to now have to meet this regulation. It is really a transport that you load onto your existing ECC system. So I'm not doing anything different with my ECC system. So I'm just loading in a transport, and it's just additional application functionality that's there. Then I access it through a series of added transactions as a result of that transport. So there's nothing that I need to do. It loads onto my existing ECC server. I don't need to load up a separate server or anything special like that. It's probably one of the cleanest application add-ons that we've seen SAP do lately.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see. There's another question here that I'm trying to get to. I think it's a more technical question, if you will, but the customer asked, if we bill the customer up front and not monthly, can we just use an F2 invoice instead of a billing plan? We are seeing so far only on service contracts, I believe. Any? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I'll take a crack at that. You don't need to use the billing plan, by the way. You can do it from an invoiced type basis. So you take the money up front, and there are a couple of strategies for doing that. So I showed billing plan just because it nicely generates that vehicle that I can use, but I can do it from an invoice perspective. Hans, maybe you can add some thoughts to that.
Yes, so the engine, right, logically sits, well, if you can give a location for it, it sits before financials. So it feeds into financials. The question is where does it get its data from? If you post a miscellaneous invoice in FI, the engine would not see that. So you would have to have some way of feeding it into the engine, whether that is by the standard integration already offered from SD, from CRM, different ways, right? That could be from anywhere, really, from an outside system via file load, for instance. Or, well, you could also build an interface that takes specific FI invoices, but you have to be clear that theoretically the engine expects some kind of feed of the invoices, right? So we don't have to use the service contracts, we don't have to use SD that way, but there's going to be some kind of feed into the system. The system does not, the engine does not directly monitor or analyze financials, FI, right?
Okay.
So that's where
Hans, following up on that question, somebody had a question about can you create revenue accounting items from a revenue contract, not from sales orders, and can we create them from sales orders, kind of vice versa?
So FICA is integrated. So we can go via contract accounting, right? So we don't have to go via SD only. Like I said, so SAP. So that's probably the term, the moment where we can introduce that nice term, adaptive reuse layer. What that means is that basically the engine itself consists of two big pieces, if you will. One of them is the interface, the inbound interface, and the second one is then the actual calculation and so on that comes up with the values, right? That inbound interface of the engine, that can take any kind of information. You may have to adapt something if you're using a source that is not standard, but many standard sources from SAP are already integrated, and you can build more integration if you need to.
All right, thank you for that.
Time for what? One more question here, John?
We have time for one or two, and what I wanted to say is there's a bunch of questions on here, and I thank everybody for submitting them. Here's what we're going to do. I have the name of the folks who asked, and of course we have your email. What we'll also do is post a document that answers all of these questions. So look for sometime early next week. We'll get to these questions, answer them. And for those of you who had additional questions or you want to see what others asked, you can log on and we will provide those. So one or two more quick questions here. What we'll do is we have a question here that said, projects that intend to fully leverage the functionality for external data input onto RAR, or are they first pulling it into ECC SD and then leveraging the tool? How does that work, Hans?
Well, hey, Hans, I could take that one. So
you got that one?
What it means is you can actually bring an external file directly into the revenue accounting system, and it creates the revenue contract directly in the system. So there's no other contract up in SD in that case. So I bring it directly in, and a revenue contract gets created. And then from there, I can reference that revenue contract, or we didn't get into it in this particular demo, perhaps in a future demo if people ask for it. You can actually go into a revenue contract and what we call manually update components. For example, let's say that I'm doing a project-based type of a deferred revenue scenario, and it's from an external system that I have that does projects. Well, I can go into the revenue accounting module and say, this item's been 50% done, or 75%, or 30% done, or this milestone's been reached. So I can manually go into the SAP Revenue Accounting module and update components, which means that as it moves along, it'll then say, okay, we're going to update the corresponding GL account to reflect that this item has now been fulfilled and can be recognized.
All right. Thank you. Last question here. And I'll let either of you decide since I'm not sure. I think it's going to be Hans. But for full retrospective reporting, what if SAP VF44 revenue was the, hang on here, the old way and RAR is the new way? How do you track both at the same time for full retrospective? Do you run both VF44 and RAR?
Yeah. Hans?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So VF44, for those that are not aware, is the SD-based revenue recognition. When you transition to the new engine, so when you want the new engine to calculate the values for deferrals and for the allocations for you, you cannot at the same time still run VF44. The system would not understand that. There would be duplications of deferrals and so on, so that doesn't work. So you have to cut over. That brings up automatically exactly the question that we're seeing here. You also actually have, maybe to say that, you also have financial reporting issues typically that sit behind that. So for instance, there's some COPA criteria, changes in the account structures, a lot of things that come along with that. And our experience so far, at least where we have seen that where VF44 was more extensively used, one of the approaches we have seen there is that this was covered or is attempted to be covered in the landscape. So we basically run parallel, a little bit parallel the engine to the old environment, so we have both data. Because what you have to be aware of is that the engine really only calculates in the new style, so the 5-step framework, right? So we cannot exactly mimic VF44. Our calculation will be a little bit different, right? So yeah, it's a very good question. That is a tricky one that will have to be solved in the implementation, the legacy data migration in the implementation.
Yeah. Thank you, Hans. Everybody, I want to thank you. It's wrapping up on noon here where I am, and of course it's 11 o'clock where some of you are. So I want to thank everybody for attending. A lot of you hung in there the extra time, and I thank you for doing that. As we said, we will make this webinar available to all of you by logging into Bramasol's website, and then we will include it in our thank you email, and we will post some of these questions. So thank you to the folks here. Thank you again to Chris and Hans for doing a terrific job, and I hope everybody makes it a terrific day. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.